On the banks of the mighty Nile, amidst the majesty of the pyramids and the whispers of the gods, a woman was born whose name shook the world, Cleopatra VII Philopator, not only for her legendary beauty, but for her empire-conquering wit. She was more than just a queen, but a master strategist, a fiery ruler, and a symbol of female power in a male-dominated world. Her love for Julius Caesar and Mark Antony was more than romance. It was a political weapon and a life-or-death gamble for Egypt. But behind her smile and glittering crown lurked a storm, betrayal, war, and an inevitable end. This is the story of love that built empires and destroyed them.
The Thorny Throne of Alexandria.
Alexandria's sea breeze carries the scent of salt and lotus flowers. In the majestic Ptolemaic palace, two young figures stand facing each other, Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. They are not only sisters, but also rivals in a struggle for the throne. After their father's death, Egypt split into two camps, one supporting Cleopatra, the other bowing to the scheming advisors who controlled her younger brother. Cleopatra knew that the crown was not a reward, but a test. From childhood, she was taught to think like a king, speak 9 languages, and read celestial signs. However, her intelligence frightened many courtiers. They called her the female serpent of the Nile. And, like a serpent, Cleopatra waited for her moment to strike. When officials rebelled and accused her of being power-hungry, Cleopatra was expelled from the palace. He fled to the eastern desert, taking with him the royal seal and a few loyal followers. There, under the hot sun, he promised himself, "I will return. Alexandria will bow down at my feet." Meanwhile, a storm from the west was approaching. From Rome came news that Julius Caesar, the great general who had just defeated Pompey, had arrived in Egypt. Cleopatra saw her opportunity. She knew that whoever captured Caesar's heart would rule the world. One night, she sneaked into the palace in an unexpected way, wrapped inside a large carpet brought to Caesar's chambers as a gift. When the carpet was unfurled, the queen appeared before the Roman general, draped in silk and by torchlight. Caesar was speechless, not only by her beauty, but by the courage that lit up the room. In an instant, two great forces collided, the world conqueror and the young queen who refused to submit. That night, history changed course, and Cleopatra knew her new game had begun. The Conqueror and the Snake Queen. Dawn shone on the walls of Alexandria's palace. Julius Caesar stood on the balcony, overlooking a city he had never known before. Beside him, Cleopatra, with her piercing gaze and serene smile, was a figure he could not ignore. She was not just a woman, but a living enigma, a mixture of danger and beauty. Cleopatra knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't begging for protection, but offering an alliance. "Egypt is the heart of the East," she said softly, "and every heart needs fresh blood to keep beating." Caesar heard her, and in that sentence he knew. Her queen was speaking not with seduction, but with the vision of a true ruler. In the middle of the night, the two had a long discussion about politics, war, and the future. Cleopatra revealed a map of Egypt, explaining the rivers, ports, and resources that could enrich Rome. She knew Caesar was a warrior, but also a dreamer. She gave him not love, but a new purpose. However, outside the palace walls, danger lurked. Ptolemy XIII and his troops accused Cleopatra of colluding with the invaders. Alexandria became a battlefield of intrigue and silent battles. Caesar, who had come to mediate, was now drawn into the Egyptian civil war. That night, as Ptolemy's troops surrounded the palace, Cleopatra stood beside Caesar, holding her father's golden short sword. "If I must fall," she said quietly, "I will fall as a queen, not as a wife." Caesar stared at her for a long moment, then replied admiringly, "And I will make sure the world remembers you, not for your beauty, but for your courage." The flames of war erupted. Roman and Egyptian forces clashed in the harbor, burning ships and lighting Alexandria's skyline in blood-red flames. Amid the chaos, the strongest alliance in history and the most dangerous love in the ancient world was born. Cleopatra had not only reclaimed her throne, she now held the heart of Rome's conqueror, and the world had just bowed before the Queen of the Nile.
Shadows on the Nile.
The smoke of war slowly faded from the skies of Alexandria. Cleopatra returned to her throne, this time not as a refugee, but as a true queen born from the ashes of battle. At her side stood Julius Caesar, the Roman general who had become her ally and lover. The people greeted them with both praise and fear. To the Egyptians, Cleopatra was a goddess descended from the heavens. But to the Romans, she was a threat wrapped in silk. She knew her every move was now being watched. But Cleopatra was undaunted. She had learned that true power was wielded not only by the hand, but also by the mind and charm. Several months passed, and Alexandria returned to life. Caesar helped build a new harbor and reorganize Egypt's government. From their union, a son was born, Caesarion, a symbol of two worlds, Rome and Egypt. Cleopatra saw this as a sign of destiny. This child would unite the two empires. However, a shadow began to cast over that happiness. News came from Rome. The Senate was growing restless. They accused Caesar of being too weak in the eyes of the foreign queen who had captivated him. Cleopatra's name echoed through the halls of Rome as the witch from the east. One night on the banks of the Nile, Cleopatra looked up at the stars and whispered to Caesar, "Rome will never accept me. They will tear us apart." Caesar took her hand and said, "Rome will submit, as I submit to you." However, even the stars know that love under power is fragile. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Egypt's advisors began whispering, "Our queen has fallen in love with the enemy." The shadow of betrayal crept back. The Nile seemed calm that night, but beneath its depths, the currents swirled violently, carrying whispers from the gods that every power, no matter how small, demanded great sacrifice. And Cleopatra knew this time of peace was merely the calm before the storm. Roman blood in the Palace of Alexandria. The atmosphere in Alexandria's palace was different. Beneath the splendor of the marble walls and the scent of lotus incense, Cleopatra felt a strange chill, a sign that treachery was brewing. Julius Caesar was now often restless. Envoys from Rome brought news that the Senate was beginning to divide his power, and some nobles wanted to end Egypt's influence over him. Still, Cleopatra remained steadfast. She knew Caesar was in danger, and like a cobra guarding its nest, she prepared a plan. "If Rome wants to take you," she told Caesar one night, "let them know that I am not just a beautiful woman, but a queen who would fight even the gods for her lover." However, time was not on their side. Caesar was summoned back to Rome to quell the rebellion and restore political order. With a heavy heart, he left Cleopatra and Caesarion in Alexandria. Before leaving, he promised, "I will build a world where you can walk the streets of Rome without fear." The days passed slowly. Cleopatra waited for news, but all she received were whispers of a conspiracy. Brutus, Cassius, and a group of senators were plotting something. Then, one afternoon, a messenger boat arrived from Rome, bringing news that struck her like a sword. Julius Caesar had been assassinated. Cleopatra was silent for a long moment. The world seemed to stop. She walked out onto the balcony, looked out at the calm Nile and whispered softly, "They killed the god for fear of the goddess who accompanied him." A silent cry echoed in her heart, but her eyes remained cold. She knew that love had become a new reason for war. Now there was only one choice: to survive for the sake of her son, Caesarion, and for Egypt.
Rome's blood had been spilled, and from the ashes, Cleopatra swore to avenge with glory. The world had not yet seen the end of the Queen of the Nile. She had just begun a new chapter, one of vengeance and resurrection.
Love and fire on the edge of Tarsus. Several years have passed since the death of Julius Caesar. The Roman world is now torn apart by civil war. Amidst the chaos, a new and stirring figure emerges: Mark Antony, a brave commander and Caesar's old friend. He leads his forces in the east, seeking allies to assert his power against his enemies in Rome. At the same time, Cleopatra had complete control of Egypt. She was no longer a young queen awaiting protection. She was now a shrewd and dangerous ruler who strategized like a general. However, the shadow of Caesar's loss still lingered in her mind, until one day, an envoy from Rome arrived with a message. "Mark Antony summons you to Tarsus in Cilicia. He wishes to meet you." Cleopatra smiled. She knew the call was more than diplomatic. It was an invitation from the future. Sailing on a magnificent ship down the Nile, she set off for Tarsus. Her ship was covered in gold, purple silk sails fluttered, and the scent of incense filled the air. Cleopatra appeared as the incarnation of the goddess Isis, not just a mortal queen. The encounter ignited a new flame. Antony was captivated, not only by her beauty, but by the soul that burned within her. He found in Cleopatra what he had been missing in Rome: courage, grace, and faith in destiny. A few days later, the two of them hosted a banquet on board a ship. Laughter, music, and torchlight filled the air. Cleopatra raised her golden goblet and whispered, "You sought allies in war, Antony, but what you found was your destiny." And it was true. That night, their love fused in the same fire that once burned Rome. The world witnessed the birth of the most powerful and dangerous couple on Earth. Their love is not just romance, but a political weapon that will change history. The fall of the Queen of the Nile. The fire of Cleopatra and Mark Antony's love lit the world on fire. Together, they ruled the East with a power and luxury that made Rome tremble. In the palace of Alexandria, the two lived like gods, throwing parties, building fleets, and dreaming of rivaling the Roman Empire. But across the sea, Octavian, Caesar's rightful heir, called them traitors and prepared for a great war. Cleopatra knew the storm was inevitable. She embraced Antony on the palace balcony and whispered, "The world is too small for two empires and one love." Antony smiled bitterly. "Then let us burn together." Battle broke out in the Sea of Actium. The Egyptian and Roman fleets exchanged volleys of arrows. The sky was filled with smoke and flames. As the battle turned against them, Cleopatra ordered a retreat. Antony, blinded by love, followed his lover's ships and abandoned his army. Defeat was inevitable. A few months later, Octavian's troops entered Alexandria. Antony, betrayed by the news that Cleopatra was dead, stabbed himself in the chest. But before he could breathe his last, Cleopatra arrived, weeping and cradling his body. "There is no victory without you, and no Egypt without me," she whispered. Now alone, Cleopatra refused to be taken prisoner by Rome. She chose an end befitting a queen. Dressed in golden robes and a crown of snakes, she sat on her throne room and allowed the sacred cobra to bite her hand. The venom flowed slowly, and her final smile was serene,
as if knowing that a new legend had been born.
As dawn broke over the Nile, Cleopatra's body lay beside the symbol of royalty. She was defeated, but also immortal, for the world could conquer her kingdom, but never conquer her name.
And so ends the story of Cleopatra, love, power, and the fall of the Queen of the Nile. A tale of love that defies logic, ambition that defies empires, and the courage of a woman who wrote her own destiny in the sands of history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss other historical episodes. Leave a comment. Legends never die if you believe that every era has its own Cleopatra. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next episode of Traces of the Legend. Here's the complete YouTube SEO package for the series Cleopatra, Love, Power, and the Fall of the Queen of the Nile.